Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel and welcome to Epcot. And look, before you say anything, I know, this is a room and resort review of the cabins at Disney's Fort Wilderness. And you're probably thinking to yourself, why are you at Epcot? You usually do this on checkout day. Yeah, I usually do. But here's the thing. The cabins at Disney's Fort Wilderness has been the most challenging review to pull together of all the places we've ever stayed ever. And at this point, we've checked out, returned home. I've been going through some footage so that I can post it here on the channel. And in that time, I've been making so many notes about our stay just to try and organize my thoughts for this review, because I want to make sure that you have all of the information that you need in order to make an informed and educated decision about whether or not to stay at the cabins, but also for those of you who are considering buying into the cabins, because the cabins are a Disney Vacation Club property and you can in fact make that your home resort if you're thinking about DVC membership. Okay, there's that Epcot entrance loop. Just started playing. It was very quiet here for a little while. Anyway, so there's been a lot to consider, organize, think about, and it wasn't until today that I felt like, okay, let's sit down and have this conversation and give you the best possible review I can give you of the cabins at Disney's Fort Wilderness. So that's what we're gonna do today. And yeah, we're here at Epcot because that's where we are. It's a beautiful day. So I hope you'll join me, and let's talk about the newest Disney Vacation Club property that has been added to the lineup here at the Walt Disney World Resort. First and foremost, let's talk a little bit about the resort itself. So the cabins at Disney's Fort Wilderness Resort is what was formerly part of Disney's Fort Wilderness Resort and Campground. Now it is called the Cabins at Disney's Fort Wilderness Resort and the Campground at Disney's Fort Wilderness Resort. And this is a really important thing to be aware of if you're considering staying here or if you're considering buying into the cabins. Especially, and I know I've mentioned this kind of in some of our past discussions, if you're someone who is not familiar with the cabins. Maybe you've never stayed here before and you're thinking, I want DVC membership, and the cabins are really appealing for one reason or another. It's important to understand what this resort is, because it's not like any other resort at the Walt Disney World Resort. Certainly not like any other Disney Vacation Club property. The cabins at Disney's Fort Wilderness Resort is located in the Magic Kingdom area, but it's not connected to Magic Kingdom on the monorail loop like some of the other more commonly thought of Magic Kingdom area resorts. It does have a boat to Magic Kingdom, which is really nice. It's a fun, kind of different type of transportation to get you to and from that park. It also has buses, which will go to Magic Kingdom during certain times of the day and then go to the other theme parks as well. This resort is massive. It's huge. In fact, there's an internal bus that gets you back and forth to the two ends of the resort, let's call it, the outpost and the settlement. Now, here in a couple days, I do want to have a discussion with you, a separate discussion about transportation at Disney's Fort Wilderness Resort or rather, the cabins at Disney's Fort Wilderness Resort and the campgrounds at Disney's Fort Wilderness Resort, because I know that this is one of the things that you guys were asking about, so we're going to dig into that and go into all the details. But for now, I just want to go over some basics. Now, of course, Disney does offer transportation to the theme parks from this resort, but it is a little bit different than any other Walt Disney World resort, even taking into consideration the bigger resorts like Old Key West or Saratoga Springs, because those often come up in conversations when we talk about big, sprawling resorts. At those resorts, there are multiple bus stops throughout the resort where you can catch a bus to the theme parks. Here at the cabins at Disney's Fort Wilderness, as well as at the campgrounds, there are only two places that you can catch a theme park bus. And you have to get to those two places in one of a few different ways. You can walk, you can take the internal bus, or you can use a golf cart. Now, we talked a little bit about golf carts the other day. Golf carts are something that you can either bring yourself, especially if you're staying at the campgrounds. Maybe you're bringing your own camping equipment and you're gonna bring a golf cart along with you. You can use that to get around, or you can rent one from Disney. It's about $70 a night. Of course, the price does go up depending on the size of your golf cart, and they do have bigger golf carts for bigger families. Now, like I said, we already covered golf carts, so you can go check that out if you're interested in learning more about the golf cart situation at Fort Wilderness and whether or not it's something that you should consider a necessity or even consider at all during your trip. But also, like I said, keep an eye out because we're going to go over transportation as well. And if you have any questions about transportation, pop them in the comments down below so we know to cover that specifically. But okay, so it's a big resort. We've got an internal bus. we've got to consider the way that transportation works getting around the resort. But another thing that we have to really take into consideration if you're going to be staying here at the cabins at Disney's Fort Wilderness is that it's very different from what you might be expecting, specifically if you aren't familiar with this resort and or if you're someone who's looking into the cabins at Fort Wilderness because you're interested in DVC. Now again, I've mentioned this already before, and I'm probably going to say this 1,000 times more throughout this review and throughout all of our discussions about the cabins. And this is because, especially for someone like myself who wasn't familiar with Fort Wilderness Resort and Campground prior to this transition over to DVC and has been relying solely on what DVC has been saying about these new cabins to formulate my opinions, I think that there's a little bit of lacking when it comes to information regarding what exactly this resort is coming out of DVC. Because it seems like what they're advertising is more of like a tranquil wilderness type retreat in these cabins, and there's also certain expectations that come from a DVC resort, right? I think that's fair to say. But in actuality, this is not that. So what is it? In a nutshell, the cabins at Disney's Fort Wilderness Resort are part of the campgrounds. They are a section of the campgrounds, and they are very much set up like a campground. And this right here is where the review gets a little bit tricky because it kind of splits off. I have some opinions regarding the cabins and the resort itself when we talk about it like it's a campground, and then I have separate opinions about the cabins and resort itself when we talk about it like it's a Disney Vacation Club resort, which it now is. So let's start off by talking about the cabins in terms of a campground. So specifically, I'm talking to those of you who are familiar with the cabins. You've stayed here for years and you're thinking, maybe I'll buy into DVC, maybe I'll stay here again because I loved staying in the cabins before. If you're familiar with Fort Wilderness already, this is a place that you already love, you know what to expect. I think that this can be a really fun resort. I think it's a fun environment. It's a campground environment. And for those of you who are familiar with camping, I mean, I've done a ton of camping over the past, 10 years alone. There's a certain vibe with it. There's a certain level of excitement. There's a certain energy that comes with doing a campground stay or being at a campground that just is very different from anything else. And the cabins at Fort Wilderness, they plop you right into that environment, the type of environment that's loud. There's music going, there's, people wandering around and chatting. There's kids running all over the place doing scavenger hunts or whatnot. It's a whole vibe. And for me, though I know that this isn't necessarily going to be something that a number of you are familiar with, I have no idea what you guys are interested in beyond Disney, but it reminded me of when I went to the Crandon World Championships, which was like this dirt track race up in, is it Wisconsin? I think it's Wisconsin. Anyway, it was a blast, and the environment is just, it's a party. And that's the environment that this resort provided. Now, in terms of the cabins themselves, I know that this is a difficult topic because so many of you love the cabins for what they were. And they were a very different thing from what they are now. That said, I do think that if you give them a chance, especially if what you like is the outdoor environment and if you like the environment that is the Fort Wilderness Resort and Campgrounds anyway, I think that you might like this too. The layout of the cabins is a little bit different based on what I've seen looking at other room tours, but it's also brighter and it feels more open. My favorite thing about the cabins, the new cabins, is that they have these floor-to-ceiling windows along the entire front wall that looks out over the deck. And it just really feels like you're bringing the outdoors indoors, which I think is wonderful. But you also can get that privacy when you close everything off. They also have these windows up top that you can open and close. So even if you want some privacy, you can close the curtains and then still have the top windows open and still see the trees and get that natural light. I absolutely love that about these cabins. And I truthfully think that you'll love it too. As far as the layout of the cabins, we do have a room tour where you can take a look at the entire cabin. We go through every nook and cranny and we share our thoughts with you on what the layout feels like to us. My feelings on the layout of the cabin are pretty much the same now as they were when we did that tour. There are some areas where it feels super tight. There are some areas where it feels like you're like shuffling around, and that's when it was just me in the cabin. Same is true when Russ got there. There were a few moments where we were like doing that like rom-com thing, trying to navigate a space. I'd imagine that it would feel even tighter if you had 6 people in there, because this cabin does sleep 6 adults. And that actually came up in some of our previous discussions. You guys commented about how the bunk beds in the cabin don't really accommodate adults. They can be adequate for adults, but I also don't think that it's going to be the most comfortable sleeping arrangement, especially because those bunk beds do share that main bedroom. So that's definitely something to think about. Also, currently, the bunk beds don't have traditional bed linens. They have sleeping bags, which again is not going to be right for everyone. So just another thing to take into consideration. But I think that for those of you who are familiar with the cabins, those of you who are familiar with camping, you'll realize that this isn't necessarily a huge departure from if you're staying in a camper. I know sleeping arrangements in campers can get a little tight, even if you're doing the tent thing. You know, you have like a 8-person tent that your entire family is sharing. It's going to be tight anyway. So if that's the expectation, then this shouldn't be that big a deal. That said, I do think it's worth noting that based on some of the information that I've not only heard from you, but I've also taken some time to confirm and look up, the cabins definitely are a bit smaller in some areas and they lack in some areas compared to the previous cabin. So for example, I believe the deck is slightly smaller. I also noticed that there was no hose access for the cabins, not the new ones, but there were hoses available at every other old cabin that we passed by. And yes, we did go and wander through the old cabins because there are a number of old cabin loops still in use. So it is definitely different, and there are definitely some amenities which are lacking that I'm sure those of you who are familiar with the old cabins will definitely pick up on and notice. Also, for those of you who have stayed at the old cabins, I know the layout might be a little bit different because we do have those floor-to-ceiling windows. So things are a tiny bit different so that they can accommodate for those windows, but I still think that those floor-to-ceiling windows are worth it. That's just me though, because I love the openness that these cabins have. Now look, before we go any further into this conversation, I want to turn over to that different perspective that I mentioned a second ago, the perspective of a DVC member, and talk for a second about these cabins from that perspective, especially for those of you who have never stayed in these cabins and are wondering what to expect. But here's the thing, the park has opened to day guests. So want to make our way in and we'll find a better place to hang out? Let's do it. A change of scenery is always nice, and there are a lot of different places we can hang out here while we finish this discussion. So let's make our way over to World Celebration. Now, when we talk about these cabins from a DVC perspective, it is a slightly different perspective for a few different reasons. And I want to just address some of this before I get into it, because I've heard a lot of people say a lot of things in the past. So just want to make sure that I'm clear when we move forward. The perspective of a DVC member on things like this is often different because as Disney Vacation Club members, when we buy into DVC, we are sold a very specific thing. And I know there are a lot of people out there, I've heard people say this to me directly or even in the comment sections, who they think that, quite frankly, DVC members feel like they're above the rest. They feel like they're better than everyone else, and so that's why their perspective is different. And that's not the case. Many families who have Disney Vacation Club are very much like my family, and maybe even like yours. They're not well-to-do, they had to work really hard, take extra shifts, save up, and sometimes maybe even scrape by in order to pay for their Disney Vacation Club membership, including their dues, so that they could ensure that their families had these vacations. And it makes sense for some of us, doesn't make sense for everybody, but I think that there's a lot of misconceptions when it comes to DVC members, and I know that that's going to come up in this discussion. I'm sure of it. But at the end of the day, I think that everyone deserves to get what they pay for. Everyone deserves to have their expectations reasonably met. We've talked about this before. And the cabins at Disney's Fort Wilderness are no exception. When DVC decided to make these cabins a Disney Vacation Club property, they told Disney Vacation Club members, both that currently have membership and are looking to add on, and those who have been considering membership and are thinking about the cabins, what to expect. And that would be DVC quality. And so that's where the different perspective comes from, and why we need to talk a little bit about this from that perspective as well. This isn't a comparison between the two cabins. This is a commentary on the property based on what Disney Vacation Club members have come to expect and may have even been under the impression they would get if they stayed at or purchased the cabins. Okay? Are we all on the same page here? So the cabins at Disney's Fort Wilderness are listed as a 1-bedroom cabin. And I know for a lot of you, you're probably thinking, oh, 1 bedroom and making some sort of connection to a 1-bedroom villa, especially because these cabins sleep 6. 1-bedrooms tend to sleep 5. And these cabins do have a lot of the amenities that you are probably familiar with if you regularly stay in 1-bedroom villas. They do have that full kitchen. Again, we looked at all of this in our room tour. You can go check that out. It also has that closed off bedroom, although it's not set up like a master bedroom where you have an attached bathroom or anything like that. You're also sharing that bedroom with 2 other guests. So that bedroom sleeps 4 as opposed to sleeping 2, which is what you'll get out of most 1-bedroom villas. The cabin also lacks in a number of areas that, again, if you're expecting a 1-bedroom, you might find disappointing. There's no in-unit laundry. This is something that a lot of people have been talking about because it's a huge perk of staying in a 1-bedroom in a place that can sleep so many people, especially as a Disney Vacation Club member, because housekeeping isn't quite the same at Disney Vacation Club resorts as it would be at other Walt Disney World resorts. It's also important to note if you're a Disney Vacation Club member who drives yourself down, or maybe you have some adult children and they're going to drive down in a separate car, or 2 families are going to meet up. But the cabins at Fort Wilderness do not have parking to accommodate multiple cars right outside your cabin. This is one of those little details that I'm sure people are overlooking. They're not thinking about. I sure wasn't thinking about this when we first booked the cabins, but sometimes we take 2 cars because of our schedules, and Russ might need to leave a little bit earlier than I do. There wouldn't have been a way to do that at the cabins. There really was only enough room for 1.5 cars, of course depending on the size of your car, or in our case 1 car and the golf cart. Now there is a place to park your car at the front, like in the check-in area, but again, this is a big resort. So if you're planning on utilizing that car during your stay, you're gonna need to use that transportation or have whoever it is that's gonna drive you out there to get the car. It's a little bit more of a to-do than you'd have at another big resort, like Disney's Saratoga Springs Resort, where you can park at every separate section, you can park multiple cars at that section. It's also important to note that you can't utilize your car to go pretty much anywhere at the resort. This again is a conversation about transportation, but if you're a Disney Vacation Club member and you're the type of person who maybe stays at Old Key West and then goes and drives your car from wherever it is that you're staying to the front, so you can go eat at Olivia's, for example, eat at the table service restaurant or pick something up from the quick service, it's not the same type of situation here at the cabin. So you do need to be ready for that, and that's something that you'll just have to adapt to once you get to the resort, which, like with everything else, will be easier for some people to do than others. Now again, these cabins do sleep 6, and that's really appealing, especially for Disney Vacation Club members who are looking at these point charts, because a lot of people can sleep in a place that doesn't necessarily require a ton of points to stay there. But I do think it's really important to take into consideration the dynamics of your family when deciding whether or not this is going to be the right place for you, especially if what you're doing is considering buying here. Unlike other Disney Vacation Club resorts, the cabins at Disney's Fort Wilderness aren't really going to grow with you in the same way as other DVC resorts will. See, at other Disney Vacation Club resorts, there's the deluxe studio, the 1-bedroom, the 2-bedroom, the grand villa, the tower studio in the case of the Riviera. This is just the cabins. It's one layout, sleep 6, and the only option for accommodating more family members. Maybe eventually your adult children have kids, you need more room. You can't stay in the same room. Even if you wanted to, you're going to need to get a second cabin. That's something you definitely want to take into consideration. But again, the sleeping arrangement in these cabins is another thing you really want to think about. Is this going to be right for you and your family? Disney Vacation Club membership, it's something that you have for decades, half a century even, depending on when you buy in. So you have to ask yourself, are your kids, when they hit those teenage years or when they become adults themselves, are they going to want to vacation with you and sleep in the same bedroom as you? Are they going to want to sleep on bunk beds? I do feel like this is something that will work for some families, won't work for others, but it's definitely something that might also seem super appealing when your kids are kids, but not as appealing once they grow up. Now, another thing that you're really going to want to be aware of if you're a Disney Vacation Club member who has never stayed at this property before is that the environment in general is very different from the environment that you get from other Disney Vacation Club properties. Now, like I said earlier, the cabins at Disney's Fort Wilderness, they're a different vibe. They are the vibe that you're going to get from a campground, not from a Disney Vacation Club resort. And again, there's nothing wrong with that. It's just different. But if you're expecting the type of environment that you would expect from Disney Saratoga Springs or Disney's Old Key West, you're definitely not going to get that here. It is louder, it is more rowdy, and quite frankly, it's not the level of quality that you're expecting as a Disney Vacation Club member. I'll get more into that here in a second, especially when we talk a little bit about amenities, but another thing that I think is really important to understand about this resort, about the Fort Wilderness Resort cabins and campgrounds, is that the guests staying at this resort vacation very differently than other Disney Vacation Club resorts or other Walt Disney World resort hotels. I mean, yeah, it's a campground, and when you vacation at a campground, you do it differently than when you vacation at a resort or a hotel, but also because there's so much going on at this resort, people come here as a destination. And we saw that during our stay, which by the way is something that I think is really cool about this resort. There is so much going on, from horseback riding to like panning for gems. You can rent kayaks and canoes, you can rent bicycles, and there's scavenger hunts. Like, there's a lot happening at this resort, so it's no wonder that people come here and do things a little bit differently than they would do them if they were staying elsewhere. The main focus doesn't seem to be, at least from what we noticed being at the resort, going to the theme parks. That's kind of an added bonus. People come here and they enjoy this resort, so I think that that's something that you also need to be aware of if you're thinking, oh well, midday everyone will be at the parks. This is not the case here at Fort Wilderness. In fact, it kind of feels a little bit more along the lines of what you get over at Old Key West, where like the pools were full all times of the day because people were there to enjoy the resort. This is very much the same type of thing, just amplified at the campgrounds. So definitely take that into consideration. I don't think that you're gonna find like the tranquil getaway that sometimes DVC makes it seem like when they're talking about the cabins. It's definitely a different thing. It's more exciting, it's more vibrant, it's louder and more rowdy. But okay, let's get back to amenities. And again, we're gonna be a little bit split on this because I know there are some of you who are familiar with the cabins prior to them being a Disney Vacation Club property, and you're gonna be like, yeah, that's what you should expect. There are other people who, again, I want you to understand, are expecting a Disney Vacation Club resort because that's what they're being sold. So, you know what I mean? There are two ways to see this, though now that we're talking DVC, I'm gonna lean toward that being what we should be getting from the cabins, despite the fact that we're not. I know I just kind of jumped ahead there, but anyway. So when it came to experiencing the resort, one of the things that really took us by surprise about our stay at the cabins was the fact that it doesn't really approach DVC quality in the way that we were expecting it to. Now, we knew it was going to be a different thing. We knew that this was going to be a whole different type of environment, but we didn't expect the quality to dip in the way that it did, and it definitely did during our stay. Again, we talked a little bit about this when we checked in on day 2, and I said that I didn't want to share any of my opinions at that time because I wanted to like think about them, and I have thought about them, so we're going to talk a little bit about now. So a few things that stood out to us about our stay here just initially was the quality of the cabin itself. Now, no matter what, no matter where you're staying, I do think that Disney should have good quality construction. I do think that the materials should be good, just because it's a good business decision on their behalf, because the better materials that you invest in, you know, putting the hotel room together and furnishing the rooms means that you have to replace them less. But it's also a really great thing to have when we're talking about DVC properties, because don't forget, Disney Vacation Club members who buy into this property pay dues, and those dues go into things like replacing furniture and updating and upkeep and all of that. The quality of this cabin was lacking in a huge way, both in the materials and furnishings as well as in the construction. Now, you probably noticed that I steer clear of saying things like, this seemed like it came from IKEA, you know, because I think that people say things like that all too often. It's like their go-to way of describing the situation. But I have to be honest with you, this cabin was put together with furniture and everything that seems like it came from IKEA. Also, just so that we're all on the same page here, I checked in on the 5th, which was 5 days after the cabins opened. And not only were there already dents and dings, which happen, okay? Like, it happens, especially on the baseboards. You know, someone kind of pushes something up against the wall in just the right way and oops, there's a dent or a ding there. No, I'm talking about things that happened either because, at least in my opinion, the quality of the materials is lacking, or the quality of the people putting it together was lacking. And there just was no attention to detail and ensuring that they were installing this in a way that wasn't going to actually damage it going in. And we definitely did see that throughout the cabin. Again, we checked in on day 5. This place just opened, and in the bathroom we saw that there was paint all over the hardware because clearly they painted after they had installed things like the toilet paper holder. The drawer that holds the utensils doesn't fit appropriately, and so it hits the handle for the oven. And that's the type of thing that causes wear and tear. That wear and tear makes the cabins look, or property in general, look worn down. And it ultimately means that more money needs to go into updating, repairing, maintaining things that are going to come out of the pockets of Disney Vacation Club members. And the dues at this place, I don't want to get too much into a Disney Vacation Club discussion, but they're already very high, and it just opened. Dues always go up. That's just one of the many things that you want to take into consideration if you're considering these cabins as a Disney Vacation Club purchase. Look, I feel like that's another discussion we're really going to have to dig into some other time. Otherwise, we'd be here all day. There were also some other really big flaws with the cabin. As I mentioned in a previous discussion, we ran into electrical issues with the exterior plug. From what we understand, the breaker popped, so we had to call someone out to handle that. But that was just the beginning of the issue. That happened a second time that day, and we also lost power to our refrigerator, which again, for Disney Vacation Club members and for others who are staying at this property, I mean, it has a full kitchen. Losing power means you can lose food, and that means losing money, which is absolutely unacceptable. Again, these are brand new cabins, and while there's always going to be someone who's going to say, look, there are always kinks, sometimes there are kinks, but electrical issues definitely should have been resolved prior to allowing guests in these cabins. And with the frequency of these electrical issues happening just during our stay alone, guests prior to us had to have been experiencing these as well. And the fact that this wasn't resolved before we checked in, honestly, I think that's pretty upsetting, though it should have been resolved before any guest checked in, but it's another story. Now, to Disney's credit, were they quick to come out and resolve this issue? Yeah, within 30 minutes of letting them know, they were out to reset those breakers every time we ran into an issue. But again, this isn't an issue we should have had to deal with. And if you add up all the time that it took us to resolve all of these issues, it took a huge chunk out of our day. Not only 2 hours at the beginning of the day to first resolve the issue, but also resolve an issue with a golf cart that we ran into, but also throughout the day as well. And we were really lucky. We caught this issue pretty early, so we didn't lose any food from our fridge. But I mean, that could have gone pretty badly, especially if we had been at the parks all day. Another real big problem that we noticed with the cabin was, I want to say it was the air conditioner. There was a huge vibration coming from the air conditioning unit, which was over the bathroom door, and it was just terrible to deal with. I know it was really hard for you guys to hear in our room tours, and when we talked about it, I tried to film it, just didn't come through the microphones like I hoped it would, but it really did feel like a vibration that you could actually feel in your body. It's kind of nauseating, and quite frankly, we kind of just did what we needed to do in the bathroom and got straight out of there, even when we were showering or whatever, because it was just too much. And I think that just goes to show that there's kind of a lack of attention to detail with these cabins, and I don't know what that issue is. I really don't, but I do think that better choices could have been made to ensure that this wasn't something that guests need to experience. Now, there were also a few other problems that we encountered during our stay. I mentioned that we ran into some issues with our golf cart, and getting that resolved was just an ordeal. There seems to be a lot of disconnect at this resort, at least right now, with no one wanting to be responsible for anyone else's issue. So the golf cart was an issue that needed to be resolved by the golf cart rental section, and that's something that the front desk didn't want to resolve. And this is also true when it comes to issues that we wanted to talk to Disney Vacation Club about. In the past, when we've run into issues with a stay like this and we don't feel like we get issues resolved in an adequate way from the resort, we call Disney Vacation Club member services, and we've always been able to get someone to resolve the issue, or at least to help us resolve the issue that way. This time we did just that, and Disney Vacation Club was completely uninterested in trying to help us, saying that we needed to let the resort handle it. There was nothing that they could do. And this is a Disney Vacation Club resort, so that was very disappointing. But again, we could be here all day talking about that alone, so we'll save that for a future discussion. Now, I also mentioned something about amenities a little bit ago, and I want to talk a little bit about that. Again, this is a Disney Vacation Club resort, and I think it's really important for Disney Vacation Club members to understand that the amenities here are not what you're likely expecting from a Disney Vacation Club resort. And some of these seem really small, but they also have a really major impact. So I mentioned already that there's no in-unit laundry. This is something that we've known about, people have had some problems with, but we've known about it and we knew about it too. What we didn't realize is that there wouldn't be any laundry available to us during our stay. So the cabins are currently in the process of being updated, but again, they are officially open. The Disney Vacation Club cabins are officially open. And yet the laundry was not open. Not only was it not open, but it was completely gutted. And there was a sign outside that said that we could go to another laundry facility, which we did try and check out. Very limited laundry facilities there. 2 of them were broken, and unlike you'd get at other Disney Vacation Club resorts, those were paid facilities. So for those of you who aren't necessarily familiar, maybe you usually get a 1-bedroom and you don't do laundry at like the pool or whatever. Even if you're staying in a deluxe studio and don't have in-unit laundry, you can do your laundry for free at the Disney Vacation Club pool or other laundry facilities within the Disney Vacation Club building. The villas over at Disney's Polynesian, not the new tower, but the existing villas are a good example of this. There's like laundry facilities in the Disney Vacation Club buildings that you can go to and do your laundry for free. So you can still pack light, you can still do your laundry, you can still wash your towels on your own because you only get towel service every so often. And that is what we expected from the cabins. In fact, we actually went out and checked this out because you were wondering about that. Some of you had asked us to go check out the laundry situation, so we did, but no, completely gutted. And we weren't informed of this before our stay, which is really disappointing because I think that, well, first of all, I think that it absolutely should have been done. If you're not ready to open, don't open. But it would have been really easy for maybe our Disney Vacation Club representative or just the cabins at Fort Wilderness to send us. Say, hey, just so you know, no laundry available right now. They also didn't inform us that there weren't going to be any towels at the pool, which I thought was really weird. Disney Vacation Club and Walt Disney World resorts always have towels at the pool, and so we didn't pack any beach towels or bring any of the towels from our room because we're going to use those to clean up. But what I thought was super interesting about this is that when I went to the front desk to inquire about where the towels were, they were like, no, we don't provide towels because, at the campsites you need to bring your own towels. But these aren't the campsites. This is a Disney Vacation Club property. So there's definitely a disconnect there, and I think this can all really be summed up by saying that if you're not ready for this to be opened as a Disney Vacation Club property, I don't think that it should have been opened as a Disney Vacation Club property, which kind of sums up my feelings about this whole experience. While there were definitely really good parts of it, I am even more confused now as to why these cabins are Disney Vacation Club cabins than before. I've said in the past that DVC really seems to be leaning into transitioning moderate properties into DVC, and I don't think that's fair. I think that it isn't fair for people who need or want those moderate accommodations, but it also isn't fair for Disney Vacation Club members who are expecting that they're going to get deluxe accommodations. And I felt like they did this with Riviera, which is a discussion we've had, but there is no question that that's exactly what they did with this. They pushed it as far as it could go, and they're going to see how many people are willing to accept this. And I don't think it's acceptable at all. I don't like what they did. I don't think that this is DVC quality. I think Disney Vacation Club members expect more and deserve more, especially when you're paying $34,000 to buy into Disney Vacation Club membership here at these cabins and have really high dues. But I also think that those who regularly stayed at these cabins, the people who really like these moderate accommodations, they deserve to have moderate accommodations that are not Disney Vacation Club properties. And if they still want to pay cash for these properties, which some people do, and I think that that's great, I think that they should still be getting better quality than they are. So those are my thoughts on these cabins. I know that we've been talking for quite some time, and it's been a lot to say, but the long and short of it is that I think you have a lot of thinking to do if you're considering not just staying here, because, hey, this might be a great experience. And I think it was a good experience. I had a lot of fun. But if your expectation is DVC, this is not that. And I think that you need to be aware of that before making a purchase here. I said it in one of our previous discussions, and I'm going to reiterate it now. I really think that you should take the time to stay here, especially if you've never stayed here before you buy in. Don't just tour the property. Don't, because The cabins that they have for display, those are by Pioneer Hall. You don't really have to make your way through the resort in order to experience that. So make sure that you're experiencing the resort, staying in these cabins, seeing if it works for you. Even if you just do it as a split stay, I think that that would be a great option. You know, just come out here for a couple days of your next vacation, see if this space is gonna work for you, see if the environment is gonna work for you before you make that commitment. But understand that if what you're expecting is that Disney Vacation Club experience that you get elsewhere at other Disney Vacation Club resorts, this is not it. But all right, I think that's all for now. Thanks so much for hanging out with me. I know that this has been like a long time coming, but it's been a lot to think about. It's been a lot to digest, and we have so many more conversations about the cabins on the way because there's so much more to discuss. I want to hear your thoughts though, so let me know what they are in a comment down below. Don't hold back. Also, check out some of our other videos about the cabins. Let us know what you think of the layout. Let us know if this is a place that you would consider staying. We want to hear it all. But for now, it's time to go out there and explore. Maybe we'll take a trip around the world. Anyway, have a great rest of your day, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Bye.